Live from Washington, this is BBC News. Breaking news this hour, 2 people have been wounded in an exchange of gunfire with Secret Service agents outside the White House.
As soon as we heard it, we ducked down, and I started to see other reporters starting to run, and you shortly heard Secret Service officers saying, "Get inside, get inside."
President Trump says that there is a deal with Iran with details to come soon, but it does include opening the Strait of Hormuz. And China's deadliest coal mine explosion in more than a decade kills at least 82 people. The government promising those found responsible will be severely punished. Hello, I'm Carl Nassman. We come on the air with some breaking news. 2 people were wounded in an exchange of gunfire with Secret Service agents outside the White House. Officials say a suspect had approached a checkpoint near the White House complex and then opened fire at officers. They say the scene is now contained and the wounded alleged shooter has been apprehended and taken to hospital. You can see a live look here. This is about a block away from the White House. The crime scene tape there in the distance, as well as several authorities now responding to that incident. Earlier, reporters at the White House were rushed inside as dozens of shots rang out in quick succession. Correspondents could be seen ducking for cover during their live broadcasts. President Trump was in the White House residence at the time. The incident comes, of course, only a month after a gunman fired at reporters and government officials while they were in the building at the White House Correspondents' Dinner here in Washington. Well, earlier I spoke with Aaron Navarro. He's the CBS News White House reporter. He has more on the reports of gunfire that was heard nearby the White House, as well as the security response that followed.
Yeah, just to set the scene for the shooting, it happened on the intersection of 17th and Pennsylvania Avenue, kind of right outside the White House grounds. And there is a gate as well as a security post along with several Secret Service cars in that area. But the latest that we are hearing from law enforcement sources is that 2 people were hit by the gunfire and then transported to an area hospital. It's the suspect and a possible bystander. Our understanding is that the suspect is in critical condition while the second individual is in serious condition at this time. It appears that U.S. Secret Service agents were fired at, though unsuccessfully, and then returned the fire from the shooter that is right outside the White House grounds. I was here on the North Lawn preparing for a live shot when you could hear about 20 to 30 gunshots at points sounding like they were coming from different guns just outside of the grounds. We know that the FBI is on the scene. The FBI Director Kash Patel put a statement out on X saying that we will update the public as we are able.
Aaron, you mentioned you were there. You mentioned you heard the gunshots. What was the reaction then within the White House grounds? How did authorities then, begin to kind of assess the situation?
Yeah, at first we ducked down. We were in covered tents in an area known as Pebble Beach. It's where all the other TV outlets do their live shots with the White House right behind us. As soon as we heard it, we ducked down, and I started to see other reporters starting to run, and you shortly heard Secret Service officers saying, "Get inside, get inside." Once we were inside, we were locked down inside in the press briefing room for about 30 minutes. Right outside those doors was a Secret Service officer, and then on the North Lawn were other Secret Service officers with guns kind of roaming as they were surveying the scene. And then just beyond the White House grounds where the shooting was, we eventually did see images of ambulances there, as we know that 2 people were rushed to the hospital.
Aaron, just for those who are not intimately familiar with the White House, how far away do we believe this incident actually happened from, where President Trump is tonight?
Yeah, we know President Trump was in the White House. We don't know specifically what room he was in at the moment. It almost feels like it's a couple blocks away, maybe 1 or 2, if that's the equivalent. That's the amount of distance between when you get outside the press gates here at the White House and get to the security gate where the shooting was near on that intersection, kind of on the west of the West Wing here. So it's unclear specifically where President Trump was when it was all happening, whether he even heard it, as it was a good distance, but being outside, you could definitely hear the rapid rounds that were shot.
And Aaron, just before I let you go, just for some context, and obviously we don't know the details or the full motive behind this shooting, but I think it's easy to assume that many people around the area there could be on edge. We're only less than a month since we saw shots fired inside the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which is a room filled with journalists. The president was there, several high-profile politicians, and the suspect in that shooting was charged now with trying to assassinate President Trump.
Yeah, I want to know, we don't know anything about the motivations of the shooter tonight, but we do know that two sources familiar with the matter said the suspect was shooting at the security booth where Secret Service agents are kind of that first line of defense before they get closer on the White House grounds. It certainly is a tense moment generally when it comes to security and President Trump. As you mentioned, it comes a couple weeks after the White House Correspondents' shooting. And in terms of where the area is, it's in a pretty busy intersection, both with cars. There's a Starbucks. There's a couple of kind of fast casual restaurants in that area. In a sense, it is good that it came after the workday. It came on the weekend, so it's not as busy as it could have been. And the shooting also came after a lid was issued for the press here, meaning we were told we weren't expecting to see the president for the rest of the day. So there were press that had already been gone or were making their way out, as well as staffers at the White House. But certainly, it's still a fluid matter, but it'll be something to watch in terms of how the White House, how the Secret Service adjusts and reacts to what we saw tonight.
Yeah, Aaron Navarro there, a CBS White House reporter. We also have our reporter, Emer McCarthy, in the area. She just sent us this update from the scene.
Well, this is the scene from the corner of 18th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue. The White House is just a few blocks away down there, but as you can see, it's a sea of blue and red. There's at least a dozen police vehicles on this block alone, and the surrounding streets are all shut off as well. There's police tape up, and there's also a growing number of onlookers, as well as a number of media, local outlets, international outlets, are all converging on these areas near the White House on what is otherwise a very cold and wet evening here in Washington, D.C.
The BBC's Emer McCarthy there reporting for us, and of course we'll continue to bring you updates on that story as we get them. All right, in the meantime, we mentioned President Trump had been there at the White House this afternoon, and shortly before all of this news with the shooting happened, he posted about progress towards a deal to end the war in Iran. He said that final aspects and details of the deal are currently being discussed and will be announced shortly. In addition to many other elements, he said, of the agreement, the Strait of Hormuz will be opened. This all coming from that Truth Social post, as you can see here, that he posted just a matter of hours ago. Well, the president also said that the agreement was subject to the approval of a number of other countries in the Middle East, not just the U.S. and Iran. Iran's Fars news agency is reporting that the Strait of Hormuz would remain under Iran's management. That's contrary to what we heard from the president. Our North America correspondent Peter Bowes gave us this update from Los Angeles.
This is, Carl, I think, a potentially significant development, but I think we've got to have the caveat that we've heard positive statements before from the president relating to the possibility of a deal being done between the US and Iran. But certainly over the last several hours, and we know that the president actually cancelled his weekend plans, including going to the wedding of his son, to be in the White House to, now we know, speak to a number of Gulf leaders about, as he put it, a memorandum of understanding pertaining to peace. And clearly this is crucially important to those Gulf states, because were there to be more military action between the United States and Iran, it would be those other Gulf states that could potentially feel any retaliation from Iran. So a number of factors, I think, converging here to make this interesting. However, I think we should be cautious, because the president is saying that this is an agreement that has been largely negotiated and is still subject to an agreement between the US and Iran. And crucially, he doesn't, in his quite long Truth Social post, he doesn't mention nuclear weapons. We know that the nuclear issue has been at the heart of President Trump's demand that Iran never get nuclear weapons. And this issue of the Strait of Hormuz, which the president says this agreement would mean the strait, this crucial waterway, reopening. Since the post of the president, we've heard from state media in Iran suggesting that they believe the strait would continue to be under Iranian management.
North America correspondent Peter Bowes there reporting. Well, speaking on a visit to India earlier, the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the situation will be resolved one way or another.
Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. The straits need to be opened without tolls. They need to turn over their enriched uranium. They need to turn over their highly enriched uranium. We need to address that issue. We need to address the issue of enrichment. These are the president's points consistently, and his preference is always to deal with it in a diplomatic way. The president's preference is always to solve problems such as these through a negotiated diplomatic solution. That's what we're working on right now. But this problem will be solved, as the president's made clear, one way or the other.
Let's bring in Suzanne Maloney now, director of the Foreign Policy Program at the Brookings Institution. That's a nonpartisan think tank. It was interesting. President Trump told our news partner CBS earlier, before he announced this deal, that he would sign a deal when he gets everything that he wants. Does it sound to you like the president is getting everything he wanted? Obviously, some details still to come here.
Well, Carl, I think that's really key. We don't know all the details of what might be in this memorandum of understanding, but at least what we're hearing does not seem to suggest that the president has achieved all of his aims, specifically around some key concessions from Iran that would enable him to present any agreement as preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon at any time in the future. So I think what we're seeing in this memorandum of understanding, at least the general talk about it, suggests that it's an agreement to talk more. And the key concession at this point would be the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, the president writing in that Truth Social post, he said, in addition to many other elements of the agreement, the Strait of Hormuz will be opened. And then maybe about 30 minutes later, we heard from the semi-official state agency, the news agency there in Iran, saying that actually Iran will maintain control of the Strait of Hormuz. How do you square those two statements?
Well, I think that what we're hearing is that the Iranians will permit greater passage through the Strait of Hormuz, but they have said all along that they will retain sovereignty over that crucial waterway, and that they do expect to try to monetize it. That isn't consistent with what the president wants, and I think that we'll have to watch and wait and see how this plays out. We have seen a trickle of greater traffic over the recent days, and that may be part of a confidence-building effort on both sides to ensure that there is some good faith on the Iranian side.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you point out, there is very little trust right now, I think it's fair to say, between the two sides. So when it comes to implementing a deal here, how difficult do you think that might be?
I think whatever this negotiating period is that we're hearing, it would be 60 days to get to a more final deal that includes elements of the nuclear program, including the highly enriched uranium and the question of Iran's future access to enrichment. That will be a really rocky period. We're going to see, I think, probably some false starts, and we're probably going to see some additional violence, simply because there isn't trust, because both sides are trying to enhance their own leverage. And because I think fundamentally the Iranians are determined to come out of this conflict in a better place, both strategically and economically.
There's also been a phone call tonight between President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. What do you expect the message might have been there? I think the feeling was, the messaging had been that the Israeli government had been a bit skeptical of the U.S. signing a deal with Iran.
Yeah, what we've been hearing is that the Israelis were really pushing the president to go back on the offensive. There's been a lot of diplomacy over the course of the past week or so, not just with the Israelis, but of course also with a number of Arab states in the Gulf, but Egypt, Pakistan, others as well. And I think it was clear that the president wants to find a diplomatic way out of this mess, that effectively the time and the cost that would be required to try to militarily reopen the Strait of Hormuz would just simply be untenable from the perspective of other American commitments and around the world, and from the perspective of the global economy. whereas the Israelis were prepared to continue to fight, I think the United States needed to find a way to get out of this mess.
Yeah, and that leads us to our last question. If this deal doesn't get done, if we don't see this materialize, how likely do you think it could be that we could see fighting start up once again?
I think it's certainly possible, especially if we get very close to the edge, but then something falls apart. The president might be inclined to try to send a message to Tehran. But ultimately, there really isn't a military solution other than one that would entail tens of thousands of American troops and a large-scale occupation of Iranian territory. I don't think anyone within this administration, or frankly, really very few people in the United States are interested in that kind of a commitment. So we're going to have to find a way to get this done diplomatically.
Suzanne Maloney, Vice President and Director of Foreign Policy there at the Brookings Institution. Always great to have you on the BBC. Thank you very much for your insights tonight. All right, back to that breaking news and that shooting near the White House. We have some more details coming in. This is coming from a Secret Service spokesperson telling our news partner CBS News that the suspect in this shooting was shot and killed after opening fire on a Secret Service checkpoint outside the White House. That spokesperson says, according to a preliminary investigation, the suspect approached the checkpoint, then brandished a weapon, taking it out of his bag, and then began firing on officers. The Secret Service officers returned fire, struck the suspect. He was taken to a hospital where we now know that suspect has died. That's all according to a spokesperson for the Secret Service. So once again, the gunman who then opened fire outside the White House, directed towards Secret Service agents, has now died. That's according to a Secret Service spokesperson. We'll have plenty more on that story, of course. Stay with us right here on BBC News for that. In the meantime, the Chinese government says it will rigorously investigate the explosion at a coal mine on Friday that killed at least 82 people. It's ordered a nationwide crackdown on illegal activity in mines and says that those found responsible will be severely punished. A massive rescue operation has been underway throughout the day. More than 100 people have been taken to hospital. It took place in Shanxi province. President Xi has called for no effort to be spared in the search for those injured and missing. Our China correspondent Stephen McDonald reports.
Nearly 250 people were on shift underground at the Liu Shengyu mine when disaster struck. According to Chinese state media, there was a gas explosion and hundreds of emergency workers responded. An already difficult rescue effort has been hampered by waterlogging. But more than 100 miners have been taken to hospital, including this survivor.
There was a smell like firecrackers. I urged others to run, but we were choking on the smoke and I fainted. Then I came to, woke up the others, and we escaped together.
This disaster harks back to the darkest days of coal mining here. In decades gone by, deadly accidents were a common occurrence. But in recent years, safety standards have improved significantly. Yet last year, the Liu Shengyu mine was penalised twice because of safety concerns. The leadership at this site has already been detained, and a government investigation team has promised harsh punishment for those responsible. Despite making breathtaking inroads into renewable energy, China is still the world's largest consumer of coal. The government had hoped its days of deadly production were over. Into the early hours of the morning, we've seen a procession of ambulances entering and leaving the mine. This is a heartbreaking sight for the people of Shanxi province because this is the heart of coal mining in China. They thought that this industry was becoming safer to work in, and yet this incident has shown just how deadly it can still be. Stephen McDonald, BBC News, Shanxi province.
The pro-Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil is set to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court to avoid his rearrest and deportation from the United States. His legal team made that decision after a federal appeals court refused to reconsider a ruling that could allow the Trump administration to detain and deport him once again. That court in Philadelphia voted 6-5 to uphold a decision that said a lower court judge did not have the authority to order Mr. Khalil's release from immigration detention last year. Let's bring in Baher Azmi now, legal director of the Center for Constitutional Rights. I understand you are involved in the legal defense here. Can you walk us through this latest appeal and the grounds you're citing for taking this all the way now to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, so what this federal court held, again, in a 6-5 vote, is that federal constitutional courts don't have the jurisdiction to hear Mr. Khalil's constitutional claims. As you may know, he was targeted for arrest and deportation exclusively only because the Secretary of State found his constitutionally protected advocacy, quote, adverse to the U.S. foreign policy interest, which is a shockingly unconstitutional decision. And what this federal appeals court said is, well, too bad. The federal courts will not have jurisdiction to review that. Instead, any challenge to the president's decision has to go through the immigration courts, which people may not know are completely controlled by the president. So this is a fight to get federal court, constitutional court review of this outrageously illegal conduct by the administration.
Let's just go back to what the Trump administration has been arguing here when it comes to Mahmoud Khalil and their case for detaining and deporting him. They say, and this is the Trump administration, they say he has anti-Semitic views and that, like you mentioned, his views are counter to U.S. foreign policy. What's your reaction directly to what they've been claiming?
It's preposterous. Criticism of U.S. foreign policy or criticism of Israel's action in Gaza is not anti-Semitism. He believes deeply in an interfaith struggle along with Jews on Columbia campus to end the injustice in Palestine. And so, of course, the U.S. can say constitutionally protected speech is adverse to U.S. foreign policy interests, but that's what dictators say. That's what autocrats say. Rubio makes that determination, but the countries that are hallmark for imprisoning people for statements that the regime disagrees with are countries like, say, Venezuela, Iran, Cuba, countries that Rubio would target for military intervention on claimed anti-democratic grounds. So this is profoundly autocratic, anti-democratic, unconstitutional behavior at the highest levels of the U.S. government, and it's chilling.
If this case is taken up by the Supreme Court, what implications could a ruling have, do you think, beyond Mr. Khalil's case, when it comes to something like freedom of speech?
Yeah, it's critical for freedom of speech because, left to stand, this decision would allow the president to roll up with immigration authorities, abduct anyone, as they did with Mahmoud Khalil, send them to immigration detention in some faraway facility in Texas or Louisiana, and say, even though I'm imprisoning you for plainly unconstitutional grounds, you can't get a federal court, a constitutional court review of that. You can only get review of that in the president's courts, the immigration courts, which, as this case has showed, are completely controlled, completely biased, a sham process. So this goes to the core of our constitutional order, to what extent the president will be subject to constitutional constraints and review by real courts. And if we don't have that kind of constraint, this will have implications far beyond Mahmoud Khalil.
And just briefly before I let you go, have you heard from Mahmoud Khalil at all? How is he doing? What's he been saying about these latest legal developments?
Well, as ever, Mahmoud is one of the most thoughtful, deliberative, and considerate clients I have ever had or will ever have. He and his family see this as yet another setback, but are committed to continuing to fight both for principles of free speech, for which we should thank him for Palestinian justice, and for the rights of immigrant detainees, which, in his experience, exposed him to just the incredible brutality that immigrant detainees face in this country.
Baher Azmi, the legal director of the Center of Constitutional Rights. Great to have you on. Thank you very much for walking us through that. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, before we go, let's return now to that breaking news, that shooting near the White House tonight. This is the scene there live. You can still see police and other authorities on the scene. We've heard from a Secret Service spokesperson telling our news partner CBS News earlier that the suspect in this shooting was shot and then killed after opening fire on a Secret Service checkpoint just outside the White House. That spokesperson saying that according to a preliminary investigation, the suspect approached that checkpoint, pulled a weapon out of his bag, and then began firing towards officers. The Secret Service officers then returned fire, striking the suspect. He was taken to a local hospital where he then later died. That's all according to the spokesperson speaking to CBS News. We do know as well that at least one other person was wounded in the exchange of gunfire with Secret Service agents outside the White House. That person was then also taken to hospital. We also know, of course, there were reporters there at the White House when this all took place. Several of them were rushed inside the briefing room for safety. They heard dozens of shots ringing out in a quick succession. We actually saw correspondents ducking for cover during broadcast. Everyone on the grounds of the White House, we believe, is safe at this time. We do know as well President Trump was in the White House residence and is believed to be safe at this time as well. And of course, this all comes just a month after a gunman attempted to gain entrance to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. We'll have more on that story as well as the situation with a potential Iran-U.S. deal, all coming up at the top of the hour. Stay with us.
Hello there. Saturday was the warmest day of the year so far in the UK, with temperatures surpassing 30 Celsius across parts of the southeast of England, which is very rare for this time of year. Sunday looks even hotter for many areas, particularly towards the southeast, as this heat wave continues towards parts of central, southern and eastern England, but always cloudier, cool and fresher across Scotland, Northern Ireland, certainly for the northwest of Scotland, where we'll see outbreaks of rain continuing in the north and the west of the Great Glen up towards the Northern Isles. But the vast majority of the country will have a sunny day, and it'll be very warm with the low to mid-20s across the north of the UK, away from northwest Scotland, to the low 30s again across the southeast. As we head through Sunday night, it's going to be a warmer and muggier night, I think, for many, but we still hold on to more breeze and outbreaks of rain in the northwest of Scotland, where we're creeping up towards the high teens now. So a muggy start to Monday, already a warmer start to the day. So temperatures really will soar into the afternoon. Lots of sunshine away from the north of Scotland, with temperatures widely low to mid-20s, southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, and high 20s England and Wales, with the low to mid 30s. We could be challenging the all-time May record. It stays dry and sunny as we head through the week, perhaps turning a little bit cooler for a while before warming up again by the end of the week.
Will Paris Saint-Germain, the French champions, hold on to the trophy, or can Arsenal cause an upset and become European champions for the first time? We'll have the very latest ahead of the Champions League final in Budapest, right here on BBC News or online and on the BBC News app.
A major reality TV franchise has been pulled off air in the UK after serious allegations from contestants.
2 women have told the BBC they were raped during the filming of Married at First Sight UK. We speak to the reporter who broke the story.
It's all on the media show on BBC News.
I'm on a Turkish adventure, combining my love of food with history. And in the country's southeast, the dishes echo the old spice routes, and the stories reach back to the dawn of civilization. Join me, Julie Lynn, for World's Ultimate Adventures. Watch on iPlayer.
Among all the flowers and the tributes here are the names of the victims of this terrible fire.
Denmark is extremely relieved that its European allies in NATO are supporting it over Greenland.
This is the desperately grim scene here down at the site of the accident. You can see behind me one of the railway carriages which was completely crushed.
Although we international journalists here on the border between Colombia and Venezuela can't enter Venezuela, we have been hearing from sources on the ground in the Venezuelan capital, Caracas.
Well, this is the spot where Alex Preti was shot dead, and you can see now a lot of people here.
There, when the story breaks, BBC News.
I've been lucky enough to live through what well might be considered the golden age of natural history filmmaking. What an extraordinary creature. I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Attenborough at 100. Watch his collection on BBC iPlayer.
Now on BBC News, last month marked a momentous milestone for presenter Tom Brooke. It was the 50th anniversary of Tom joining the BBC as a trainee news journalist. Another chance to see talking movies.
Hello from New York. I'm Tom Brooke, and welcome to the first in the new series of Talking Movie. Talking Movie. Talking Movie. Talking Movie. Talking Movie. In recent days, I've been here in London, the city of my birth, compiling a rather different edition of Talking Movies, looking back at my 50-year career in British broadcasting.
BBC. Thank you.
Like many people, I've always had a very personal connection to the BBC, its people and its programmes. After all, the corporation will played a big role in creating our collective memory as a nation. In April